So I was scrolling on Facebook the other day and I came across this sponsored video telling us that we should stop putting out free content, giving away value for free because we're just wasting our time. And then I carried on scrolling and I came across another very similar advert. And this lady was saying to forget about the principle of know, like, and trust. And again, stop the free content. And so, ironically, I decided to create a free podcast episode about it. There I was, seeing these gurus telling me not to provide free content. And my first idea was, why don't I provide free content about that? And here's why I felt it was important. When I saw the first ad, I actually stopped for a moment and I questioned whether I should be doing things like my podcast. It was a fleeting thought, but the fact that it did make me stop and consider, it reminded me of those mixed messages that we are surrounded with and how confusing and overwhelming that can be. So today I'm going to help you navigate that. And yes, I'm even going to encourage you to challenge advice that you may hear from me, because finding your own route really is the key to finding out what will work for you. So when I watched that ad and I had that thought for a moment about whether I should even be doing a podcast where I share lots of free content, my thoughts didn't end there. I mentioned earlier that it was a fleeting thought, and it was, but it was only that question that was fleeting, because what I then thought about is how powerful my podcast is in my business. One of the things that happens when I go to, say, a tutoring event is people often approach me telling me that they have listened to my podcast, and that starts a conversation. People message me on social media with similar messages, and I love that because being a business owner can feel incredibly lonely. And when you start having real conversations with people who are in your world, it's really nice because you just feel that little less lonely. And also, the vast majority of people who work with me tell me they initially came from my podcast. And this is important because I want people to do their due diligence before they work with me or anyone really. It's just really good practice. In fact, most people who I speak to before they work with me will tell me how they came across me. But if they haven't told me that, and if I've never worked with them, I prompt that question. And if they say that someone just recommended me and they booked a call, but they never actually checked out the podcast or any of my content, I don't actually let them become a client until they have. So, for more reasons than one, my podcast is a really brilliant tool in my business because people who come into my world have already listened to my content. I rarely work with a client for a short period of time and then stop. Usually clients work with me for a really long time. I'm talking years, and I love that. Or they return after a while because I can truly help them, because over time I've gotten to know them and I've seen their journey. Often clients become friends. So my podcast is about more than just giving free value every week and people listening and that being the end of our relationship. It's the catalyst to something a lot more meaningful. So if I listened to that kind of advice that I saw in that ad, I would save time because I no longer need to record a podcast, but I would also miss out on great relationships, great clients, and also producing content in a way that I enjoy. And that's why I wanted to create this episode, because when we perceive that someone knows more than us, we want to listen to them. After all, if it has worked for them, then it may well work for us. But we must always put our experience into the mix. I recently was having a conversation with a client who asked me which social media platform I thought they should use to attract more students. And I looked at the profile of their business. I haven't been working with them for very long. And I said that in my experience, for businesses like theirs, Facebook tended to be the best platform, the most effective one. And then they said that, well, actually, in the past, they have had more clients come through Instagram. And that was music to my ears. I told them, right, I'm wrong. This is great information. Let's go with what you have experienced. Let's double down on your Instagram strategy. So it's not really about one person being right and one person being wrong. If you really want advice to be powerful, then your experience is important Because if you merge someone else's experience with your experience, you're going to come up with something that's incredibly powerful. Now, this is really difficult if you are not very experienced, or if you have experience doing different things in your business or in your marketing, but you haven't achieved the kind of success you want to achieve, because then you assume your experience doesn't really count. You kind of lose trust in your experience. But I disagree with that, because there's a step that comes before that. Let's say you've tried lots of different things and they haven't necessarily worked. Before you assume it's because you're not good at it or that you were doing something wrong, maybe analyze why they didn't work. For instance, did you try doing too much and spread yourself thin, and therefore you didn't really create a strategy that was tailored to each platform that you want to double down on? Were you creating one-dimensional content, or moving away from marketing and moving into selling group classes? Were you having really transactional conversations with clients? Were you even having conversations with potential clients, or expecting them to buy by pressing a button on your website? There are so many reasons why what you have tried may not have worked. And it may not be because you were trying the wrong thing. It might just be that what you were doing needs to be tweaked. And of course, having a conversation with someone who may know the answers to those questions, or to help you identify those weak spots, could be really, really valuable. But there is a difference between taking someone's guidance and following someone's advice blindly and just ignoring your experience in the process. One of the reasons I feel very strongly about the importance of always challenging people's advice, and I don't mean to prove them wrong, I just mean adding color to other people's advice about your business, is because those ads that I saw weren't actually wrong. They were just wrong for me, or the way I interpreted them wasn't right for me. In the world of business and marketing, the reality is that everything works and nothing works. You might say that you have tried different strategies to sell, let's say, group classes, and that hasn't worked for you. But then you look around and there might be other people who are trying the same thing, or seemingly trying the same thing, and it is working for them. So it's really not as clear cut as saying there's one way to achieve an outcome. There are many ways to achieve outcomes. It depends on how you go about applying those methods. Let's take marketing as an example. If you look around you, you will see people really successful on different platforms. They're applying different business strategies, they're having different business models. But if you really analyze the people who you deem as being successful, what you'll also notice is that they don't spread themselves thin. Even if they're on multiple marketing platforms, for example, it's very easy to spot which one they really focus their attention on. And that's the one where they yield the best results. If you think about their business model, it's very obvious which one is their flagship offer, so to speak, the one they sell the most and focus on the most, the one that they get really known for. That's why they're successful, not because they're trying to do everything, but because they master one or a very few things, and they do those things really, really well. When I look around me, there are people who very successfully attract clients through running challenges. I've never run a challenge. I focus on my podcast. Or maybe I do a webinar style thing. Does that mean that I'm limiting myself from attracting clients because I'm not also running a challenge? I don't think so. I think it means that I can achieve the same results by going all in on very few strategies rather than spreading myself thin and trying to do absolutely everything. When you're in a position where you feel panicked or you desperately want more, the instinct is to try something different or to do more. But different and more doesn't always equal to more. Working harder doesn't mean you're going to get better results. However, working on the right things, using your time effectively, all of those things is what really brings those results. So, in some ways, those adverts were right. You can achieve more by doing less. In fact, that's the core focus of virtually all the work I do with clients, especially my bespoke one-to-one program. But the advice on its own is incomplete. It's not about finding hacks or about doing the least amount of work possible to get the best results. It's about being efficient and effective. It's about using the time that you do have 100% effectively instead of spreading yourself thin, instead of focusing on the wrong things and trying to do lots of different things and not really doing any of them all that well. And so I circle back to the title of this episode, which is to make sure that you are challenging advice that you come across, whether it's related to marketing, which is probably the one that confuses us the most, whether it's related to what you should have in your business, the direction you should grow in, or even which diet you should follow because you're trying to lose weight. We should always challenge and we should always be adding color. We should be using our experience. That's what we need to add to the mix, or at least that's one way to add that color. Because another thing to consider is what would actually work for you. Because whether we're talking about a diet or marketing or business decisions or anything, we're the ones who we have to execute them, don't we? For them to work, we're the ones who have to implement those ideas. And so if we choose something that doesn't feel aligned or we can't really keep going for very long, then they won't work anyway, even if they're a fantastic strategy. And so that's another thing to bring into the mix. I've been telling you how amazing my podcast is for my business, and it may have created a light bulb moment for you where you thought, oh, maybe I could have a podcast. Maybe it would work really well for my business. And maybe you should. Maybe it would work really well. But if you would struggle to keep it consistent, and honestly, podcast consistency is hugely important. But if you would struggle to know what to talk about, or if it's a medium that your target audience wouldn't consume, then regardless of all that great experience that I've had with my podcast, you may not share the same results. So thinking about you and your circumstances and your audience, your preferences, what you can keep consistent, all of this and more needs to go into the mix when you come across business advice, whether you've paid for that advice or whether it's free. Now, sometimes you do have to take a leap of faith. I invested in some business coaches who I work with now, and they gave me advice at times that didn't feel very comfortable. However, I could feel that even though it wasn't comfortable, I could feel in my gut that it was because I felt scared, not because their advice didn't feel aligned. Differentiating between why you're having a certain reaction is pretty important, as I learned. Because when I did decide to follow their advice, my business grew really fast. I know that sounds a bit gimmicky, but I'm really not exaggerating. It grew fast. In 7 days, I remember achieving what had taken me several years when I tried to do it myself, because a lot of fear and a lot of limiting beliefs were holding me back. So recognizing that when you're resistant to advice, or when you need to mold advice, why you need to do that is incredibly important, because sometimes you'll be resistant to advice because of legitimate experience or even intuition that you should listen to. But sometimes you'll be resistant because it just doesn't feel comfortable, because you've never done it before, or because you feel scared, because you've told yourself it's too risky. And when I was thinking along those lines, the thing that gave me the courage was knowing that I had my business coaches sitting behind me. I was scared, but I also knew that if things didn't work, I had them and they would help me navigate that situation. And because I've experienced how powerful that feeling is, it's exactly how I support my clients when they feel scared. I tell them that I have their back. I promise them that if things don't work out, if their fears come true, and I'm there and I won't abandon them. It's really important because as business owners, making decisions about anything can be really hard when we don't know the answers to those what if questions. And then we know that we're the person who has to deal with it if things don't work out. But when you have really solid people in your corner, that fear lessens a little bit. Or maybe it doesn't, but you have the courage to do that thing that you're scared of anyway, because you know you have really good people in your corner. So the next time that you receive business advice that kind of makes you question or doesn't quite feel right, the first thing to do is to analyze why you're questioning it. Why doesn't it feel right? Why do you feel resistance? Once you've worked out that answer, you'll have a steer as to what you should do next. Maybe you should do it anyway if you know that you're feeling scared, or maybe you shouldn't do it and you should add your experience to the mix. Before you try doing more and changing everything around because you're assuming that what you've been doing hasn't worked, try and analyze why it may not have worked so that even if you do add more, even if you do change things around, you don't lose the bits that are actually really effective. So I really hope this episode has helped you feel less overwhelmed about making decisions, marketing, the business messages that surround you. I think we're really lucky to be surrounded by so much free and valuable content. But the downside is that it can get noisy and it can get confusing. But if you're able to be intentional about interpreting the advice, challenging the advice when you need to, in the way that you need to, and coming out of that with an action plan that would actually work for you, then you've actually turned that overwhelm and that confusion and that noise into something that's a lot more positive. So thanks as always for giving me your time. If you have a really quick moment, if you're watching on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please do leave a review. It really helps me reach more people. Thanks again for staying with me till the end, and you'll hear from me on Wednesday.